Have you ever walked into a room and felt the silence? Not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, waiting kind of silence? The kind that feels less like absence of sound and more like presence of loneliness? That was the Valerius estate. From the outside, it was everything you might dream of. A palace of pale stone, surrounded by gardens so perfect they looked painted. But inside the air felt still. The kind of quiet that comes when too much sadness is gathered in one place. And moving through that quiet was a young woman named Lena. Lena was a temp cleaner, new to the staff. She moved to the grand rooms like a ghost, dusting surfaces that already gleamed, polishing floors that already shone. She was quiet, careful, and carried a story in her eyes that she shared with no one. This job was her lifeline. The money she earned here was for her grandmother's medical bills. So she kept her head down, did her work, and tried to be invisible. But on this particular morning, invisibility became impossible. It started as a sound, a faint, shrill cry that cut through the mansion's perfect silence. It was coming from somewhere above, from the forbidden fifth floor, a place the staff whispered about but never entered. Lena froze, her dusting cloth suspended in midair. Her heart gave a sudden, painful thump, because this wasn't the cry of a child who was hungry or tired. No, this was different. This was the sound of pure panic, a desperate, gasping sob that seemed to claw its way out from some deep, terrified place inside. It was a sound she knew. You see, Lena had a brother. His name was Leo, and Leo was autistic and nonverbal. She remembered, with a clarity that could still bring tears to her eyes, finding him under their kitchen table, rocking back and forth, hitting his head, his face a mask of frustration he could never, ever put into words. That sound, that was the sound Leo used to make. The sound of a soul trapped, screaming for a way out. Miss Petrova, the voice of the head housekeeper, Mrs. Green, floated up from the bottom of the staircase, sharp and warning. Stay clear of the upper wing. The fifth floor, the unspoken rule. But that cry, it was a magnet, pulling at something fundamental in Lena's soul. To ignore it would be a betrayal of Leo, of her own past, of the very compassion that made her who she was. She didn't answer Mrs. Green. Instead, she started to climb. Her footsteps were silent on the plush carpet. The higher she went, the louder the crying became, each sob twisting like a knife in her heart. At the end of a long, dim hallway, a door stood partially open. A flickering, bluish light pulsed from within. And there he was, a little boy, no more than 7, curled into a tight ball on the floor. He was rocking violently, hitting his forehead against the leg of a heavy bookshelf. Thump, 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 over and over. There was no one else in the room. No nanny, no comfort, just this small, terrified child, completely alone in his storm. Lena's breath caught. It was like looking into a heartbreaking mirror of her own childhood. Every instinct told her to rush in, to grab him, to hold him tight and make it stop. But she knew, with a certainty born of painful experience, that would only make it worse. So she did something else. She stepped softly into the room and crouched down several feet away, making herself small, non-threatening. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost swallowed by his cries. "I'm not going to touch you. Just sitting right here, okay?" The boy didn't look at her, but for a fraction of a second, his rocking slowed. Just a hitch in the terrible rhythm. A tiny crack in the wall. She kept her hands in sight, palms open and up, and then, slowly, so slowly, she lifted one hand and traced a simple sign across her chest. It was a single word. Safe. A motion she hadn't used in years. One her grandmother had taught her a lifetime ago, for Leo. A language without sound. The boy's head turned. Just a flicker of an eye in her direction. A momentary connection in a sea of chaos. And that's when the door was flung open. "What the hell are you doing in here?" The voice was like thunder. Lena turned quickly. Standing in the doorway was Aris Thorne, the master of the estate, a man carved from marble and money, his face a mask of fury and fear. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, standing up instinctively. "I heard him crying." I thought. And who gave you permission to be in this room? He demanded, his gaze cutting from her to his son and back again. No one, sir. I thought he might be in danger. Step away from my son, he commanded. Her muscles stiffened, but she obeyed, moving carefully to the side. Aris strode into the room, his focus entirely on the boy. He bent down, his movement stiff and unfamiliar, and tried to lift his son. The result was instantaneous and explosive. The boy erupted. The quieting sobs turned into full-blown, ear-piercing screams. He kicked, he clawed, his small arms flailing wildly, fighting off his own father with primal terror. Aris struggled to hold him, his face a mask of shock and helplessness. "What's wrong with him?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Why does he do this?" And in that moment, Lena saw it. She saw past the expensive suit, past the anger. She saw father, a terrified, heartbroken father who had no idea how to reach his own child. "May I?" she asked again, her voice gentle but firm. This time, Aris didn't stop her. He was paralyzed by his son's reaction. Lena stepped forward and knelt. She didn't reach to take the boy. She simply knelt there, present and calm, and the moment the child felt her presence, the storm ceased. His panicked eyes found hers. He twisted out of his father's grasp and collapsed into her arms as if his very bones had turned to water. His small hands gripped the fabric of her sleeve like it was a lifeline. He buried his face in her shoulder. And just like that, the screaming stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier, more profound than the crying had ever been. Aris stared, utterly stunned. He looked from his son, now peaceful and clinging to the stranger, to Lena's calm face. "How?" he began, his voice stripped of its earlier thunder. "What did you do?" Lena looked up, still gently swaying with the boy in her arms. "I didn't do anything, sir," she said softly. "I just listened and signed." "Signed?" "A little. My brother, he's nonverbal autistic. This used to help him calm down when words failed." Aris's posture shifted. The rigid control he always carried seemed to soften at the edges. The suit that made him look so powerful now seemed to hang on him, too tight. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Lena Petrova. I clean the East Wing." "You're not a therapist?" "No, sir. Just a cleaner." He watched her, just watched, as she held his son. The boy, Elian, was completely still now, his breathing soft and even. Aris ran a hand through his hair. He looked lost. He looked human. "Can you?" He started, then stopped. "Can you stay a little longer today?" Lena looked down at the sleeping boy in her arms, at the trust he had placed in her so instantly. She felt the ghost of her brother Leo in the weight of his small body. She nodded. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I can stay." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lena sat in the quiet nursery, a stranger holding a stranger's child. She didn't know it yet, but in that simple act of staying, she had just thrown a stone into the still waters of the Valerius estate. And the ripples would change everything. There's a certain kind of quiet that comes after a storm. It's not the heavy silence of before, but a gentle, healing quiet, the kind where you can finally catch your breath. When Lena returned to the Valerius estate the next morning, the grand front door felt different. It wasn't just an entrance to a workplace anymore. It felt like stepping across a threshold into a new world, a world where everything had changed. Mrs. Green showed her to a small, simple room in the staff wing. It was modest, but it was warm, with a window that looked out over the back garden. "Mr. Thorne had this room prepared last night," Mrs. Green said, her voice a mixture of curiosity and caution. "He said you were to be comfortable." Lena placed her small bag on the bed. Inside were just a few changes of clothes, a worn journal, and a single, framed photo of her grandmother and her brother, Leo. She placed it carefully on the nightstand. A piece of home in this unfamiliar place. By 8 a.m., she stood outside Elian's nursery, her heart beating a quiet, nervous rhythm. This time, no crying greeted her, just a deep, waiting silence. She pushed the door open to find him already awake, sitting on a soft rug, silently sorting color blocks into two neat piles. He didn't look up as she entered. "Good morning, Elian," she said softly, her voice a gentle offering in the quiet room. He didn't respond, but he paused. For just a heartbeat, the sorting motion stopped. It was the smallest of acknowledgments, but to Lena, it felt like a sunrise. She didn't push. She didn't demand his attention. She simply walked in and sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet away, giving him his space. She was just a presence, a quiet, calm island in his world. After several long minutes, he nudged a red block toward her with his toe. A small, tender smile touched Lena's lips. "Thank you," she whispered, and gently pushed the blue block back toward him. And just like that, a new language was born, not of words, but of colored blocks, of shared space, of patience. Hours melted away like this. There were no grand speeches, no forced interactions. Lena began to hum, low and soft, an old gospel tune her grandmother used to sing. It was a sound from her own childhood, a sound that meant safe. Elian didn't protest. In fact, he leaned in slightly, the way a plant leans toward the light. Unseen in the doorway, Aris Thorne watched. He wasn't in a suit today, just a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he wasn't barking orders into his phone. He was just watching. His arms were crossed, but the usual tension in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a quiet, aching awe. He saw the way Lena sat, still and steady, not trying to force his son into a mold, but simply meeting him where he was. It made his chest ache in a way he didn't understand. It wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was something that had been absent from this house for a very long time. Hope. Later that evening, as dusk painted the garden in shades of purple and blue, Lena found Aris standing by the nursery window, watching his son sleep. He was peaceful today, he said, his voice so much quieter than she'd ever heard it. No meltdowns. No hitting. Lena nodded, coming to stand a respectful distance away. "He just needs to feel safe, Mr. Thorne. He needs to know he can lead and will follow." Aris turned from the window, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "I don't know what you're doing," he admitted, a rawness in his voice she hadn't heard before. "But it's working." "It's not a trick," Lena replied gently. "It's time. It's presence." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting back to Elian. "He used to love trains," he said, the word seeming to escape him without permission. "My wife, Elara, she used to take him to the Railroad Museum every other Saturday." He swallowed hard, the name of his late wife hanging in the air between them. "He hasn't asked to go since she passed. Not once." Lena didn't say anything. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She just let the silence hold the memory of the vibrant, laughing mother Elian had lost. She understood now that the silence in this house wasn't just Elian's. It was a shared silence, a grief that had settled into the very walls. "I thought we were doing okay," Aris continued, his voice low, as if confessing a great sin. "After the funeral, I hired the best therapist money could find. I enrolled him in every specialized program. I spared nothing." He turned to her, and his eyes were full of a helpless guilt. But it only got worse. The tantrums, the fear, the screaming. And now here you are. And he's calmer than I've seen him in over a year. Lena's heart broke for this man. This man who had tried to solve a broken heart with checklists and bank balances. "Grief isn't something you treat like the flu, Mr. Thorne," she said softly. "It's not linear. Not for you. Not for him. Do you think he remembers her?" Aris asked, the question hanging in the air like a prayer. Lena chose her words with the care they deserved. "I think he feels her absence. Even if he doesn't know how to say it, he feels the shape of the space she left behind." Aris sank into an armchair, elbows on his knees, looking at his son with a mixture of guilt and awe. "I was married for 10 years, he said. "We met in college. I was rigid. She was jazz. She laughed too loud. Danced barefoot on our balcony in the rain. Made breakfast at midnight. Mina smiled. She sounds wonderful." "She was," he said, and something in his voice cracked, just slightly. At that moment, Elian stirred in his sleep. His eyes fluttered open. and for a brief second, he looked across the room and locked eyes with his father. Aris stood and approached his son slowly, his movements cautious. "Hey, bud," he whispered, crouching down. "You okay?" Elian didn't speak. He didn't react. But he didn't recoil. He didn't scream. He just looked. Aris glanced up at Lena, a silent question in his eyes. "You think he'll ever talk again?" he asked. Lena's gaze was warm and steady. "I think he already is, Mr. Thorne. You just have to learn to listen to the version of the language he trusts." Aris held his son's gaze a moment longer, then nodded. It was a silent understanding. A fragile, trembling beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. Later, as Lena prepared for bed in her new room, she looked at the photo of her grandmother and Leo. "You'd like him," she whispered to the image of her brother. "He's a mess, but he's trying." A knock came at her door. It was Mrs. Green, holding a tray with a covered plate. "Mr. Thorne said you missed dinner." He insisted. Lena accepted the tray, stunned. Under the lid was a perfect meal, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables. Food that felt like care. Before she turned to go, Mrs. Green lingered. "Don't get too comfortable," she warned, but her voice held no malice. "Mr. Thorne, his moods change." Lena nodded. "I don't expect anything." But as she ate alone in her room, she knew that was a lie. She was starting to expect something. She was starting to hope. And in a house that had been built on loss, hope was the most dangerous and the most beautiful thing of all. Down the hall, Aris Thorne sat in his study, a glass of scotch untouched on his desk. The file in front of him was Lena's employment application. He read the handwritten reference from her old manager. "She's not fancy, but she shows up early, works late, and never complains. She's kind and she knows how to listen." He leaned back in his chair. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. But inside, for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like a void. It felt like a promise. A new language was being learned in the Valerius estate. The language of colored blocks, of quiet humming, of shared silence. And with every passing hour, the walls around a little boy's heart and the walls around his father's began to grow just a little bit softer. There's a peace that feels too beautiful to last. Like the world gives you a perfect, golden moment just so you can feel its absence all the more sharply when it's gone. In the Valerius estate, our days have become a gentle rhythm of colored blocks and quiet humming, of father slowly, tentatively, learning to speak his son's language. It was a fragile peace, and it was about to be shattered. It started with a sound that didn't belong. Not a child's cry, but a sharp, echoing knock on the grand front door. It was a kind of knock that wasn't asking for entry. It was demanding it. I was in the kitchen, slicing apples for Elian's snack. I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine even before I saw the figures through the sidelight. 3 of them. A man in a gray suit, holding a clipboard like a weapon, flanked by 2 others with rigid, official postures. Aris reached the door first, his body instinctively blocking the entrance. "Can I help you?" The man offered polite, bloodless smile. "Mr. Aris Thorne? I'm Marcus Fielding, from Child Welfare Services." He held up his badge. "We received a report concerning the welfare of your son, Elijah Thorne. We're here to conduct an assessment. Child Welfare Services." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. My blood ran cold. I moved without thinking, putting myself between the strangers and Elian, who was playing with his trains on the floor. I pulled him close, and I could feel his little heart begin to pound against me, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Aris's voice was dangerously calm. "This is absurd." "On what grounds?" "The report is confidential during the initial evaluation," Marcus replied, his tone unchanging. "May we come in?" "No," Aris said, the single word sharp as a blade. "Not until I speak to my attorney. You have every right to counsel. However, if you deny entry, we are required to escalate. We can return with a court order in a matter of hours." It was a standoff. My arm was wrapped tightly around Elian. I found my voice, though it felt thin. "He's safe," I said, my eyes locking with the social workers. "I'm with him every day. There's no neglect here." Marcus Fielding's gaze shifted to me, analytical and detached. "And you are?" Lena Petrova. I'm his full-time caregiver. Another note was jotted down on the clipboard. The sound of the pen scratching was unnaturally loud. Aris exhaled a slow, controlled breath. He made 2 quick calls, one to his lawyer, another to a security contact. When he turned back, his face was a mask of restrained fury. "You may enter," he said, his voice low, "but nothing is to be touched without my consent." They stepped inside, and it felt like a violation. Their eyes scanned the foyer, the living room, the pantry, not as part of home, but as potential evidence. One agent asked to speak with Elian alone. My hold on him tightened. "No," I said, my voice firm. "He doesn't speak with strangers. He has autism. I am his voice. You can ask your questions, and I will translate." Marcus Fielding studied me, then nodded. The assessment was a blur of quiet tension. They looked in cupboards, asked clipped questions. They found nothing, of course. The house was perfect. The child was cared for. But the damage wasn't what they found. It was in their very presence. The violation of our fragile sanctuary. Just before they left, Marcus turned back. "Off the record, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice dropping. "It's rare we see a child this well cared for. Whoever sent us, their motivations may not have been pure." The door closed. The silence they left behind was louder than any scream. Aris stood with his back to us, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "Someone," he said, his voice a low growl, "is trying to get to us." The storm had made landfall. It didn't take long for his team to find the source. A former employee, Sylvia Warner, whose access had never been fully revoked. She was now working for Lark Technologies, Aris's most ruthless competitor. This wasn't just corporate. Aris seethed in a tense meeting later. This was personal. They knew how to hit me. Through my son. I sat silently, my mind reeling. I was no longer just a caregiver. I was a pawn in a war I never enlisted in. And then the storm went public. The story broke online, then on the news. Billionaire under investigation for child neglect. And there, right beside his name, was my face. The mysterious live-in nanny. The rumors swirled like poison. I was a gold digger, a manipulator. They dug into my past, my humble background. Anonymous comments called me the maid who would be queen. Aris fought back fiercely. He held press conferences, his arm a protective barrier around me. Miss Petrova has been a godsend to my son. These allegations are malicious fiction. But the shadows were long, and the whispers were cruel. I tried to shield Elian, but he felt the tension. He became quieter, more withdrawn. One night, as I scrolled through the vile comments on my phone, a private message popped up. "I know what you are. He'll find out too. You don't belong there." My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. This wasn't just an attack on Aris anymore. It was a direct assault on me. Aris found me like that, pale and shaking. He took my phone, read the message, and his jaw turned to stone. "This ends now," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. The legal battle was a cold, brutal war. Lark Technologies filed an injunction, claiming Aris's business practices were coercive. He countersued for defamation and emotional trauma. And then I was called to testify. The courtroom felt like a cage. The air was cold. The lights were harsh. Across the room, Sylvia Warner sat with a smug smile. The opposing attorney, a shark in a suit, tried to dismantle me. "And why would a housekeeper," he said, dripping with condescension, "insert herself into such a delicate family situation?" My throat was tight. I looked at Aris, who gave me the slightest nod. Then I looked at the judge, a wise-looking woman named Adeline Monroe. I took a deep breath and found my voice. I grew up in a system that never noticed when I went hungry. I began, my words clear and steady in the silent room. Or when my brother couldn't speak, and no one bothered to learn how to talk to him. I turned my gaze to the attorney. I promised myself that if I ever saw that look in another child's eyes, the look of being utterly forgotten, I wouldn't walk away. That little boy wasn't just frightened. He was lost. And I know what that feels like. The courtroom was utterly still. The posturing, the legal jargon. It all fell away in the face of that simple, devastating truth. Judge Monroe regarded me with a long, thoughtful look. "Thank you, Miss Petrova. You may step down." As I returned to my seat, my legs weak, I felt Aris's hand find mine under the table. His grip was firm, an anchor in the storm. "You were remarkable," he whispered. The ruling came a week later. The case was dismissed, but it was the judge's final words that truly ended the storm. "I find it deeply disturbing," Judge Monroe said, her voice ringing with authority, "that a corporation would manipulate child welfare systems for gain. Miss Petrova's actions reflect the highest moral standard. This court recognizes her not just as a witness, but as a protector. Protector. The word should have felt sweet. But as we walked out of the courthouse, past the flashing cameras, I just felt tired. So tired. The storm was over, but the landscape was scarred. That night, back in the quiet of the estate, I sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the darkness. Aris joined me, handed me a mug of tea. "I used to think I could fix everything with money," he said, his voice heavy. "Turns out, the things that matter most can't be bought. They have to be fought for." I sipped my tea, the warmth a small comfort. "Do you ever regret bringing me into all this?" I asked, the question I had been too afraid to voice. He didn't answer with words. He simply reached over, took my hand, and placed it firmly over his heart. I could feel its strong, steady beat against my palm. "No," he said simply, "because you brought me back to mine." And in the quiet aftermath of the storm, under a sky full of stars, I finally let myself believe that some foundations, once shaken, don't crumble. They settle, and they become stronger than ever before. After a great storm, the world doesn't just go back to how it was. The landscape is changed, cleansed in a way. The air feels newer. The colors seem brighter. That's what it felt like at the Valerius estate in the days and weeks that followed our court victory. The fight was over, but none of us were the same people we were before it began. I woke up each morning now with a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The heavy silence that used to haunt these halls had been replaced by something lighter, the quiet hum of healing. When I walked into the kitchen each morning, it wasn't as an employee, but as someone who belonged. Elian would be there, often sitting at the island counter, and Aris would be attempting to make breakfast. The first time I saw the mighty Aris Thorne, CEO of a multinational corporation, standing over a skillet of scrambling eggs with intense concentration, I had to hide my smile. "Morning," he'd say, his voice warm and genuine. No more guard walls. No more pretending. Elian would turn, and when his eyes found mine, they'd light up in a way that made my heart feel too big for my chest. He didn't say anything, but he'd reach for my hand, something he'd started doing recently. His small fingers would wrap around mine, and he'd give this little squeeze that said everything words never could. One morning, as I was flipping pancakes, Aris came to stand beside me. "They're not going to let this go, are they?" he murmured, nodding toward the television where a news segment was still running about the housemaid who stood against a corporation. I followed his gaze, then looked down at Elian, who was carefully arranging blueberries on his pancake in a smiley face. "I don't need them to let it go," I said softly. "We have everything we need right here." But the world outside our bubble wasn't quite done with us yet. A letter arrived one afternoon, delivered by private courier. Cream-colored envelope, elegant handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was from Judge Monroe. She was offering to nominate me for the state's Child Welfare Advisory Board. She wrote that my experience, both personal and professional, could help shape policies to protect children like Elian, children like my brother Leo. I stood there in the foyer, the paper shaking in my hands. Aris found me like that, frozen in place. "What is it?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I handed him the letter, unable to speak. He read it slowly, then looked up at me, his eyes shining with something that looked like pride. "This is incredible, Lena," he whispered. "You could change things for so many children." That's when I realized my purpose wasn't just here within these walls. There were other children out there feeling as invisible as Elian had been, as Leo had been. The following week, Aris, Elian, and I visited a community center on the edge of the city, a place for children with disabilities. The moment we stepped inside, I felt like I'd come home. There was a young boy there, maybe 7 years old, struggling to form letters with his hands. Without thinking, I knelt beside him. "Like this?" I whispered, gently guiding his fingers to sign home. When he got it right, his smile could have powered the entire city. I looked up and saw Aris watching from the doorway, Elian's hand in his. The expression on both their faces was identical. Awe, and something deeper, understanding. As we were leaving, the center director touched my arm. "If you ever want to volunteer," she said, "our doors are always open." I looked at Elian, who was quietly signing "thank you" to the director. "I think I like that," I said. But the biggest miracle was still waiting for us back home. That evening, I was putting Elian to bed. The room was soft with twilight, the only light coming from the stars outside his window. I just finished reading him a story, and his eyes were getting heavy. I leaned down to kiss his forehead, the way I did every night. "Good night, my sweet boy," I whispered, turning to leave. And that's when I heard it, a small, sleepy voice. So quiet I almost missed it. "Stay." I froze. My breath caught in my chest. Slowly, so slowly, I turned back. Elian's eyes were open, looking right at me. He pointed to space beside him on the bed. "Stay," he whispered again. Tears filled my eyes so fast I couldn't see. 2 years. For 2 years, this beautiful boy had been silent. And now he was asking me to stay. I sat beside him, taking his small hand in mine. "Always," I whispered back. "I'll always stay." He smiled, a real, true smile, and closed his eyes, his hand still holding mine. I don't know how long I sat there, watching him sleep, tears streaming down my face. But when I finally looked up, Aris was standing in the doorway. He'd heard everything. His own face was wet with tears. He didn't say a word, just opened his arms, and I went to him. We stood there in the hallway, holding each other, two broken people who had somehow found their way to wholeness in each other, and in a little boy who had finally found his voice. Later that night, Aris found me in the garden. The jasmine was blooming, filling the air with its sweet scent. He took both my hands in his. "Lena," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I know this isn't how these things are supposed to go, and I don't want to rush anything, but I need you to know I want you to stay. Not as staff, as family." I looked at our joined hands, then up at his face, at the man who had learned to be a father again, who had fought for me when everyone was against us, who had let his walls down and let love in. "I'm not going anywhere," I told him, and I meant it. The following spring, there's a photo that sits on Aris's desk. It shows me and Elian under the big oak tree in the garden, both of us laughing, sunlight filtering through the leaves. Beneath it, engraved in small letters, it says, "Family is the place where the storm breaks." And you know, they're right. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who show up when you need them most. The ones who see the real you, even when you're hiding. The ones who teach you that the most powerful language isn't spoken with words, but with a heart that's willing to listen. Elian speaks more now. Not a lot, but enough. He calls me Lena and Aris, dada. And every time I hear his voice, I remember that night, the night he asked me to stay. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest love. Sometimes the person who's meant to clean the house ends up saving the family inside it. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find exactly where you belong by helping someone else find their way home.